Ladies and gentlemen, those of you across the country who watch late night TV, the top favorite private detective on national television after midnight is still Mike Connors as Mannix, the Emmy Award-winning show from the 1970s, that unforgettable score by Lalo Schifrin. And Mike Connors, whose real name, Krekar Ohanian, who brought in many of his great Armenian heritage aspects into that series. And this is the perfect pivot point then to bring back again for a second time our special guest, Mr. Armen Sahakyan, who is the Armenian National Committee Western Region Director. He's got his master's from Johns Hopkins University, and Armen is an expert in one of the darkest moments in the history of mankind. That was the initial mother of all genocides before the ultimate horrifying father of all genocides, the Holocaust. But there was a precursor, and that was the Armenian Genocide. And to tell us about it, remind us why it's important, Armen, this goes back around World War I time when the Ottoman Turks were basically slaughtering millions of Christian Armenians.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Jacobson, for having me back on your show. It's always a pleasure. And so, to bring everyone up to speed about what the Armenian Genocide is about, basically from the years 1915 to 1923, the Ottoman Turkish government went on to the centrally planned and executed genocide of the indigenous Christian populations in the Ottoman Empire, which at the time were primarily the Armenians, as well as Greeks and Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac populations. And the unfortunate reality is that up to this day, the Turkish government, which is the legal heir to the Ottoman Empire, is still in active denial of this mass atrocity that took place. And so the Armenians, the Greeks, Assyrians, as well as people of good conscience all over the world have been, fighting this uphill battle in trying to raise awareness as well as legislate the education of this atrocity. And as you correctly mentioned, it has been the precursor to the Holocaust and other horrors that humanity has been faced with. So we are trying to ensure that the first modern case of genocide is recognized and people know about it, so that we ensure that such horrors do not befall any other people in the future.
Yes, so here with Armen Sahakyan. And Armen, what's important, I think, is you really have to link the Armenian Genocide with the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust of the Jewish people, because literally Hitler's lieutenants were helping direct that Armenian Genocide. Is that not correct?
That is absolutely correct. And actually, as far as I know, the head of the Auschwitz camp actually used to be a German soldier during the days of World War I. And as you may know, Germany and the Ottomans were allied at the time. And so a lot of the German soldiers, unfortunately, were at the time directing and training the Turkish army officers on how to, quote unquote, most effectively exterminate the Armenians and other Christian populations during the Armenian Genocide. And because this crime went unpunished, then these people got their training, and they also were emboldened by the fact that the Ottomans did not face any major justice. And so that laid the groundwork for the Nazis to go on and execute the horrors, the Holocaust. And Hitler actually famously said, when he was giving the orders to commence the Holocaust, and I'm quoting, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" So Hitler was very much aware of the Armenian Genocide, and he knew that the world, after it was over, did not pay attention and did not follow through and, bring to justice the perpetrators of this crime, of this international crime against humanity. And so it was one of the reasons that Hitler and the Nazis felt that they could also get away with the Holocaust.
This is such important linkage, and this is why I call the Armenian Genocide the mother of the Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazis. in World War II, the Nazi Holocaust, in terms of numbers of people, the worst ever in mankind. Armen, it is just emotional even to this day to read the accounts, the savagery, the butchery, the fiendishness of the Ottoman Turks and what they perpetrate against the Armenian people, taking innocent Christian girls even before the age of puberty, raping them, impaling them on crucifixes, horrific, fiendish, satanic evil.
Yes, unfortunately, that was really the case. And during the days of the genocide, over 2/3 of the Armenian population was actually slaughtered, and the other 1/3 was sent into exile into the Syrian desert. And many of them were actually women and children, because the men and the elderly were the first ones to go. The men were, of course, killed because of their physical ability to protect their families, and the elderly were just not in a physical condition to survive in the long term. So the women and the girls were taken as slaves, were taken in and raped, and actually many of them were forced to convert into Islam. And today, a lot of people are coming out of the woodworks in Turkey, mostly grandmothers of people who on their deathbeds are confessing that they are Armenian, that their grandkids have Armenian blood in them. So it is actually estimated that close to 2 million people today in Turkey have some form of Armenian ancestry, and most of it goes back to their grandmothers who were forced into marriage, rape, and forced to convert their religion and denounce their heritage and never speak of their Armenian ancestry. So yeah.
Well, Armenia forever, and the man who's keeping this torch of memory alive is a great young American, Armen Sahakyan, with the Armenian National Committee. He is the director of the Western region. He's got his master's from Johns Hopkins and an academic pedigree as long as your arm. He is well known in the academic community. Armen, when we had you on last year, you were at the bill signing with Governor Reynolds for Armenian Genocide Recognition Month in Iowa, and it was a bipartisan effort of both Republicans and Democrats. And tell us what's going on in Nebraska. We have our transmitter in Iowa, our studio in Omaha, and our signal reaches multidirectionally equally to Nebraska and to Iowa. And it sounds like there's some new action going on in Nebraska. I'd like our listeners to be made aware of this.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to bring everyone up to speed on this, and thank you for raising the issue. As you correctly mentioned, Iowa was one of 49 states actually in the union that has officially recognized and condemned the Armenian genocide. It has always been a bipartisan matter, and Nebraska actually back in 2004, so preceding Iowa by about 13 years, had officially recognized the Armenian genocide through the gubernatorial proclamation, and Alabama was the latest state to join the ranks about a week ago, to becoming the 49th.
Congratulations, Armen. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, and all the kudos to my colleagues out in the Eastern region, actually. So Senator Sarah Howard of Nebraska actually put out a very commendable bill forward that would mandate the education of genocide in general in the state of Nebraska, including the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, as well as other instances that she has outlined in her legislative bill number 640. Unfortunately, what happened after that is that the Turkish government representatives, whom I mentioned earlier, are still in active denial that this genocide ever even took place, went on the offensive and started interfering into the internal affairs of America, and more specifically in Nebraska. So they have been harassing our elected legislators, more specifically also including Senator Howard. And so she actually has been forced to offer an amendment that would take out all the references to examples of genocide except for the Holocaust. So she has basically offered an amendment to nix the Armenian genocide from the list in her bill. And this was actually reported by the Omaha World Herald, that she did this because of concerns raised, and we also suspect intimidation by Turkish government representatives.
That almost sounds like foreign collusion, Mr. Sahakyan.
Absolutely. I mean, this is unacceptable. This is just outright wrong. And if anything, the state of Nebraska and even the U.S. administration have to send a very strong message to the totalitarian anti-American regime of Recep Tayyip Erdogan back in Ankara in Turkey, to tell them that they have no place to meddle in the internal affairs of America. And, the United States should affirm the truth and the history and its proud history with saving the Armenian nation 100 years ago through the Near East Relief Organization, in which, by the way, Nebraska played a very crucial role as well.
I'm so glad you said that. You're exactly correct about that. There's a lot of Omaha newspaper articles that even reference that as direct source documents. Thanks for giving a salute to Nebraskans and Iowans who helped in that, Armen.
That's absolutely true. Yes, I would actually encourage anyone who is interested to visit neareastmuseum.com as well as americawethankyou.org. These are two websites that have been dedicated to pay tribute to the Americans who played such a crucial role in saving the Armenian nation and the hundreds of thousands of survivors and the orphans that were saved through this unprecedented relief effort. And many of these Armenians later found refuge in the United States to stay away from the very persecution and other horrors that the Turkish government is still undertaking against its own citizens today. So all of those Armenians that you have, most of them in the United States today, have been contributing greatly to the American society, to the culture, economy, politics, and we all owe it to the brave people, the brave men and women 100 years ago who came to the rescue of the Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and other Christian minorities during the dark days of the genocide.
Armen, this is Chip Riedman. I think what John had mentioned earlier is, I can almost say, the tip of the iceberg, although I don't want to belittle the situation that happened particularly back in World War I. Are you familiar with a book called The Sword and the Scimitar? I just got done reading that here a few weeks ago. Definitely not a book for the weak of stomach or weak of heart. The description that John had of the horrors that happened in World War I is basically the same as what has happened through the centuries, particularly with the Turks coming through many areas of Europe, especially when you consider what happened in the Balkan area. Do you have any familiarity? I assume that you have read that book. Any comments?
I have actually not had the time to read, but thank you for the recommendation. I will definitely check it out. But in broad and general terms, what happened is, you're absolutely correct. The Ottomans also undertook a lot of crimes in the Balkan areas as well, especially against the Serbian and other Christian minorities. And this happened especially during the later days of the Ottoman Empire, as it was close to to cease to exist. And so a lot of the Christian subjects, such as the Greeks, the Serbians, the Armenians, and others, were demanding greater religious freedoms and other rights that were not granted to the Christians at the time in the Ottoman Empire. And unfortunately, what they received in response to their rightful and peaceful demands was, the bloody sword that came from the Sultan, that came from the Young Turk regime, as well as from President Ataturk, who is considered the founder of modern Turkey. Unfortunately, over the centuries, as you correctly mentioned, the Turkish government as well as the Ottoman government were very intolerant of any dissent, of any diversity in their society. And so today we see the same happening with the Kurdish population in Turkey. 100 years ago, it was the Armenians. And the Kurds actually have a famous saying these days. They say to the Armenians, they had you for lunch, they are having us for dinner. So we need to stand up, speak truthfully about what happened 100 years ago to the Christian minorities during the genocide, during the Armenian genocide, because that also means bringing more freedom, democracy, and liberty to the citizens of Turkey today who are faced with government crackdowns. Turkey today is #1 country in the world for jailing journalists.
Yep.
It is ranked not free by Freedom House
right.
and all the other organizations like Human Rights Watch and even the U.S. government. They had actually imprisoned Pastor Brunson, an American who was there on a missionary expedition for over 3 decades, I believe, and for practicing his freedom of religion and faith. He was basically imprisoned by the government of Turkey, and they refused to even release him. And a more recent example is a couple of years ago in Washington, D.C., in broad daylight in downtown, President Erdogan's goons felt empowered and emboldened that they can beat up peaceful American protesters.
I remember that.
And they still have not faced justice for this. And
exactly.
So the link and the chain goes back centuries, and it is manifesting itself in various different ways. And so we as Americans and as a U.S. government need to stand up to this bully, to the gag rule exerted by a foreign dictatorial power of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And we need to really tell them that, they are not welcome to bring and export their illiberal ideas and ideals into this nation.
Agreed, and it's foreign collusion at its utmost. So even our friends on the left, who have been railing for years against foreign collusion, would join us on this. Armen, one book that I might point our readers to, Aurora Mardiganian's classic, Ravished, Armenia, 1918, the story of Aurora Mardiganian, the Christian girl who lived through the great massacres. That book was really a catalyst to begin a little bit of discovery about this horrific Holocaust, was it not?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, Aurora Mardiganian was a survivor of the genocide herself. She later found refuge in the United States, as many other Armenian Americans today and their ancestors did. And she became an instant Hollywood hit. She was actually also an actress. She produced a movie by the same name, Ravished, Armenia, that was showcased by the Near East Relief Organization that I mentioned earlier. It was actually congressionally mandated, and it still exists to this day as the Near East Foundation. And so they were showcasing the movie, and I'm sure also spreading the word about the book. And all the proceeds from showing the movie as well as the sales were going towards the relief efforts to save the Armenian survivors. Actually, for reference, they had a goal of raising $30 million to save for the relief efforts, and they raised over $117 million in 1915 dollars, which is inflation adjusted close to $2.7 billion today.
Amazing.
So if the American people today rallied about the cause and raised close to $2.7 billion to send half the world away. So this is a really amazing, proud chapter in America's history. And unfortunately, a lot of people do not know about it today, although they, of course, did very much 100 years ago, because this was very much an American, authentic grassroots movement. People, children donating their toys and clothes, and churches holding a Golden Sunday brunches to donate all the proceeds and eat the food that the orphans would be eating in the orphanages. And this was, led by the highest echelons of the American leadership, including the president and his administration. And it went through several U.S. administrations through the 1930s, I believe, through President Coolidge. And today, as a tribute to all of this, there is the Aurora Prize for international humanitarian relief, or something along those lines. And it is a tribute that the Armenian nation is paying back to the heroes of today, the people who are saving and going to rescue the people in need. And Aurora Prize gives out, I believe, $1 million to an individual every year, to a humanitarian, that can be directed to the charities of their own choosing to help the people today. So people can check it out. It's called the Aurora Prize. It's basically the Nobel Peace Prize equivalent for humanitarian work, and it's led by prominent Armenians worldwide.
Yeah, so
Aurora's legacy lives on.
It does. 100 years later, she published that book in 1918. We're 100 years later, and this literally was a genocide that evil forces have tried to sweep under the rug. We will not allow that to happen. And Mr. Sahakyan, you are the torch, the custodian of this story. A young intellectual that you are, I'm so edified and inspired by your articulate courage in bringing this to the fore. And this will never be forgotten, and it will serve as a lesson for us to never allow it to happen again.
Absolutely. I mean, could not add anything more to that. Thank you so much for giving me the venue and the opportunity to talk to people, to raise awareness and educate. This is a very important story that cannot and will not be forgotten. And so as it again comes back to Nebraska, I call on all the people of good conscience, the citizens of Nebraska, to call on their legislators to ensure that the legislative initiative by Senator Howard is passed, and the people in Nebraska get to learn about the Armenian Genocide together with the Holocaust and other such instances of mass crimes, international crimes against humanity.
I couldn't say it better. Armen Sahakyan, the Armenian National Committee Western Region Director, scholar, author, presentation expert at many of these historical panel discussions, white papers. He is coordinating the Western Region effort to highlight the grim story of the Armenian Genocide. Armen, we'll have you back as this story continues to play out in Nebraska.
Absolutely. It will be my pleasure. Thank you again so very much.
Thank you and God bless you. Armen Sahakyan, guys. And we will take a break and be right back.